Okay. Okay, I'd like to welcome everybody to a quick overview of, what's happening with Microsoft Dynamics GP at this point, what you should be planning, what's the timeline on things, and we can kind of move on from there. So I'm going to just go on the next slide and introduce ourselves. So I'm Jim Koshar. I'm the president of Hudson River Computing. I've been working with ERP products for 42 years. I've been 34 years in the industry. And my specialty is my background is strong in distribution manufacturing, and I do have some nonprofit experience as well as general accounting and all. My degree is in accounting with a minor in computer science, and so that's been very useful over the years. Shelby Gipp is our chief marketing officer, and she's been with us for 7 years. And her specialty is marketing. Oh, big surprise there. So we'll kind of go from there. So let's move on. So why is now the time to migrate from Microsoft Dynamics? Microsoft Dynamics GP has had a great kind of timeline. So what we're going to actually kind of talk about today is what the timeline is, what, the multiple support ending timeframes are, questions and answers about, purchasing new modules and things like that. When you should start really looking at these items, right? What companies, what's the experience of the companies we've already migrated from Dynamics GP to a cloud product, and what should you look for in a new ERP product? And again, there's different things that kind of relate to that. We're not getting into a lot of detail on certain things, like for example, what you look for in a new ERP product. That's going to be kind of a separate session. What we're doing here is giving kind of an overview. We're really trying to focus on it so people understand what's happening with Dynamics GP in its end of life. So we go a little bit further. There's a timeline to Microsoft Dynamics GP. So if you look at it, you'll see here, what were the logos through time? So some of you have been with us for a long time. So when I actually entered and started working with Great Plains Software was back in 1991. Just giving ideas before Dynamics, strictly a text-based product because they actually did run on both DOS and Windows. Pretty straightforward. And as well as Windows was just kind of starting then, as well as Mac. Okay, believe it or not. So there's actually that cross-platform piece. In 1993, they released Microsoft Dynamics GP. Okay, so way back when we paid our $5,000 for the T-shirt. In 92, we signed up in November 92 with Dynamics, working with it for a long time. So with that, you'll start to see this was the first logo. Notice in 94, they changed it. For those of you who remember way back when, this little guy here was actually a button. This guy here at the top, that was there. And you probably all remember this.
Welcome to Dynamics.
Okay, hopefully you guys can hear that. But the idea of it is that you got the welcome wave. So it was kind of those types of things. So that takes us to 94. We go to the next slide, you'll see that.
Welcome to Dynamics.
Oops. If you look here and see 1996, how they changed the logo, what they changed it to in 97. This was still all Great Plains. 2001, Microsoft purchased them. You notice they kept the wheat fields, okay, with the sun, and you'll see that Microsoft Great Plains Business Solutions was a name change. And then a little bit later, they renamed it to Microsoft Business Solutions, and then they named individual products where it became actual Microsoft Dynamics GP in 2005. So you can see originally we had a nice colorful logo with our sales. You notice in 2013 they went to just the one blue, and we go a little bit further, you'll see that they made a minor change in 2016. Okay, so you can see here that's kind of the change they made for Microsoft Dynamics. That was the last logo change. Okay, that was 9 years ago. Hudson River Computing, just for fun. This is what our original logo looked like. This is supposed to be the river. I don't know how much it looks like the river, but if you take a look at the Hudson, sometimes it's a little cloudier than that it might look there. And then we redesigned our logo in 2004. So just a little fun trivia there. So when does support end for Microsoft Dynamics GP? It officially ends December 31st, 2029. That's when they're going to stop actual regulatory tax updates, any modifications to the product, basically security updates, mainline support. And then already the product updates are very limited for GP. When I say that, it really is much more regulatory. They might have a page, 4 or 5 things that they've taken care of. But other than that, they're really kind of narrowed down what they're updating in the product. Now, with that, all that's only available if you're on the current version and you have a current enhancement plan. So what happens is each year now they're forcing us to make sure you guys upgrade to keep up to date with the product. All right. Now with that, if you don't have the enhancement plan, we can install the update, to this point, for example. With that, if you take a look at Microsoft Dynamics GP 2018 R2 and earlier, mainstream support on that has already ended. So if you're on an older version of Dynamics GP, that support is already done. There's no new installations, okay, for effective April 1st, 2025. So they're not selling new licensing for the perpetual method of licensing, okay? You still have about 7 or 8 months where you can buy the subscription-based version. However, because of they're getting ready to shut down the product, it really doesn't make sense to do a new version or new implementation of GP at this point because the life is so short on it. So with that, the other thing that's happening along with that is that Acumatica is increasing the enhancement plan percentages. So each year is going to become more expensive for your renewal plans. Okay, that's something where they're trying to get people off the system, trying to people make sure they look at other products and move from Dynamics GP. Secondarily, they still will offer some security and hot fixes only with the enhancement plan until April 30th of 2031. Okay, but keep in mind, there's a lot of reasons why you should probably upgrade before that. All right, you don't want to be on a limited support product. Why start planning now? All right, part of it is 2029 sounds like it's a long ways away, right? It's basically 4 years away. Here's the thing with that. You can be into a couple of year process by the time you start figuring out what you want to do, and then actually ending up with having a new, completed implementation. So, I kind of broke down kind of the typical breakdowns of time. This can vary longer and shorter, but kind of a normal process. So the selection process can take a dedicated 2 or 3 months. Not one of those where you just look for a month and then you take a couple months off, you get back to it. That'll extend that, right? What I'm talking about is you're kind of serious now, you're ready to make the move, trying to figure out what you want to do, and you go through and it'll take 2 to 3 months to kind of go through that process by the time you're done. Scheduling, implementation, data migration, training, tailoring, etc., typically takes 3 to 6 months for a go live. So by the time you sign the contract, you can plan another 3 to 6. There's some variations on this. And what it comes down to is complexity of the system. If you're just doing general ledger, pretty simple, probably can do it in a month. If you're on the other hand, you're working on something where you have manufacturing and distribution and maybe websites, the answer is you're looking more at that 6-month range. All right. And in those cases, with more complex implementations, there may be a first round and a second round of the implementation, one to get live, one to expand the functionality, usage, and tailoring of the system. And that's where I have additional tailoring of the system, may take another 3 to 6 months. So in a more complex system, it might take up to a year before everything settles down, everybody's real happy, they have the reporting they want, etc. All right. So total timeline comes down to 12 to 18 months, fairly typically. So that already puts you in the, at this point, you're in the, well into 26, maybe 27 by the time you're done. So the idea is, like I said, 29 sounds like a long way out, but it's really not. Some of the implementation and also even in the selection process is dependent upon your time availability, right? Nobody has, 40 hours a week to just spend on this, right? So it comes down to you still have to do your day-to-day work, you have to still run GP. So it takes time to do that to get into that new system. So the idea is to plan it so that it's reasonable for the amount of time it's required for you. And if you try to crunch it too tight, it becomes more difficult. We don't want to do this in a crisis scenario. We want to do it in a planned scenario where you have time to work things out appropriately. So internal time can be a couple 100 hours to 15 hours, depending on the complexity. Okay, let's go on to the next slide. So what's the good news? Okay, the good news is the new cloud systems are a lot easier to use. I'm sorry. The good news is that Clients that have migrated have found this, right? They found the systems to be a lot easier to use. There's no hidden buttons with functionality. It's all pretty much right in front of you. They don't need as much assistance for data access. The tools are easier to use, very spreadsheet-like in a lot of systems, right? So if you can use an Excel spreadsheet, you can use the system very effectively for reporting and getting your information in the format you want to see it. They love the interactive dashboards. Your reporting thought process changes with the cloud product. You have a series of dashboards with drill downs so that you can see, okay, I need to work on this particular item. I have my 10 items are going to ship today, or here are my 5 things that need approval. The beauty of it is it's a working reporting tool. So it ends up allowing you to then click on that item to actually accomplish that. So that's kind of the idea behind it, right? So we're finding that they really enjoy that. How does it save you time? There's a lot more functionality built directly in the system. Where GP, we almost had always a third-party product, even if it was just for Micker printing on checks. That's all built into the newer systems now. So you don't have to go through and do that. Approval systems are built into the system, right? Versus having to have an outside system if you want to do like purchase approvals and things like that. It's all built in. The functionality is much deeper. Reporting, with Dynamics GP, you're probably using Manager Reporter, spreadsheets, or in the old days you used FRX, right, to get your financial reporting out. Within Acumatica, we have a very similar tool to FRX/Management Reporter, and it's built right into the system. There's no other tool for it. It's right there. Okay. There's other additional financial reporting tools available if you need something more sophisticated, more complex, etc. But the base tools really work very well for our clients. All right. Ease of maintenance. This sounds like a minor detail, but we've all been through the Microsoft GP upgrades, where what ends up happening is you have the upgrade, we got the server upgrade overnight, and then we start doing the desktops during the day, the following day, getting everybody up. The current ease of use and ease of maintenance, in particular, is if I want to take and do the upgrade, or we want to have the upgrade done, we typically plan it. We typically would do a sandbox for testing if it's complex. If it's a fairly simple update or you don't have a lot of complexity, we might even waive that. And then what we do is we pick the date and time we want the upgrade to occur, right? And we request it for that time frame, and then you come in the next morning and it's done. The new systems all use the browsers. So the only thing you need to have is the browser in your system. Unless you deleted it overnight, you're going to be fine the next day. All right. There's more ability to adjust to the user. We talked about dashboards. You can create dashboards for specific people, for specific roles within the organization. You can modify them. They can be tailored to individuals very easily. So the idea is all these things tailored to the user. If you have a data entry window and you have multiple line data entry, for example, you can drag and drop the order of the columns or take columns off that aren't necessary. Whereas in GP, you always had to tab through them regardless. Okay. Now with GP, you could have modified the window, but it was a tremendous amount of work. It wasn't a drag and drop by the end user. Okay. And each one of those is tailored to the end user then. So if I go in and I enter a AP voucher and I want the things in a certain order, the line items for their data fields, I drag it for mine. Somebody else comes in and drags it for theirs. And then we have our own setups for that. So the idea is it becomes very adjusted to the user to make them more efficient. Data access, very easy to use queries. Within GP, we had a tool called Smart List, which everybody used in some form or another. But here's the difference. With Smart List, everything was really kind of built in Smart List and then went out from Smart List. So if you wanted to see AP transactions, you just have to go to Smart List, go through the list, find that particular item, click on it, and then you could actually see your information. The other adjustment is it was hard to manipulate that or select information out of it. It's limited. Okay. So within a product like Acumatica is what we carry, it ends up being a scenario where with the queries, you can very easily tailor them, change the columns, adjust the columns, drag and drop them, but it's built throughout the product. So if you're in accounts payable and you're looking at bills or vouchers, it's there. It's not in Smart List, right? So it's all built throughout the product, makes it very streamlined, very easy to use, much more user friendly. Dashboards, we talked a little bit about that before, where they can be tailored to the individual. They can contain everything from KPIs, trends, queries themselves, lists, links to other websites, etc. Okay, so it's a very powerful tool. We're not going to get into demoing anything today because we're trying to focus on, kind of why you should move. And in this case, this is the good news. You're going to gain a lot. And we talked about the interactive reporting. I run a report. I can click on the link. It takes me to the transaction. I look on the, much like you see in smart list. When you click on something, you can actually go to that particular transaction. You can do the same thing here, except there's more links built in. So you can go to the vendor, or you can go to the voucher, or you can go maybe to the payment if it's there, right from that same particular list. So it's a little bit different, a lot more powerful as to how it works. So that makes everybody more efficient, right? So you can actually do more, concentrate on things, and kind of go there. All right. And when I say low code, no code, tailoring, it's just what I mean. It's a scenario where, in the old days, if you had to modify a window in a GP in Dexterity, that became a whole effort, right? It became complex just to even set it up to get it to do that. Within Acumatica, there is built-in tools to do full-blown customization, building modules, whatever you want to do. However, and there's no extra fee for that; it's included with the product. But the other part of it is a lot of this doesn't need code anymore. Hey, when I save this and it hits account number X, I wanted to update the description to be, the vendor and the account number and whatever on that line, right? I can have that triggered from the transaction and goes off and does the update. So when I say no code, it's exactly what it means. It makes it a lot simpler, makes it more tailored to your situation, what you need to do. It is also much easier to add fields if you need them. Okay. So the idea is a lot of functionality, a lot of things are going to change, but it's going to actually work so much better that people really are extremely happy when they make the move. Okay. It's a tough decision. I understand that. And, nobody likes change. And this is a hard change. So because of that, it becomes a scenario where you go through it and then you kind of get there. All right. So it's kind of a thing where the reward is there, which is kind of important, right? So you're seeing that and you're going to get it. And a lot of people look at it where, hey, it's a graphical system versus a graphical system. When we move people from either manual systems or from text-based systems into the graphical systems, people could see the advantages. Here they're looking graphical versus graphical. It's more than that. The technology has actually improved significantly. Okay. So that's kind of the other part of it. The other thing I just kind of want to mention is that we don't have to worry about backups and all that anymore. That's all handled. So like in the product we carry with Acumatica, your system's running in a cluster, minimum of 4 locations across the country. If one of those locations go down, they'll never know it. So the uptime is very significant. All right. Secondarily, the other part that we found is that we got clients do their own mistakes. Okay. And they had to have their database restored. And in one case, it took us 25 minutes. This happened twice to us with our clients. We've been working with Acumatica, for example, for 2015. But the idea is we made the request. 25 minutes later, they were back up and running to within 1 minute where they gooped up their data, right? And then in another case, it took 40 minutes. They had more data, so it took a little bit longer for the restore. So the idea is that response is important. Okay. You didn't have to worry about installing servers again. You didn't have to, worry about patching servers. It's taken care of for us. All right. So it makes it a lot much more easier, much more reliable. Okay. So how can we help you? Right? Who you work with is important. People don't realize that sometimes, but keep in mind, you can have a great system that has a poor implementation, and the problem is that it doesn't work well for you. You can have a system that's not as great, it's functional, but maybe not exactly the best system, but you have a good implementation, can make all the difference in the world. So experience is important with that. So that relationship becomes important. One thing I want to point out is ERP implementations typically remain in production for an average of 13 years. There's some less than that, some more. There's a lot of reasons why they change. Many of you have been using Dynamics 20 or 25 years. So think about that for a second. The technology is roughly the same from when it first started, when you first bought it. Great product, don't get me wrong, but it didn't keep up with the technology changes that have happened to make the ease of use, ease of maintenance, etc. To get there, to tailor it to what you really want to do. So what happens as you go through the process of selection, who you pick is important. It's not, just the software vendor. who you have help implement, the value-added reseller, which is what we are. It's crucial for your short-term and long-term success, right? So you need to know how many successful implementations they've had. Um, how many installations have they done? Those things all become critical and important because it makes it important for your success. So that's the important aspect of that. Um, when I talked about success rate, and then the software vendor's reputation. What is their reputation? Right? Are they easy to work with? Can they respond to, different issues? What's their support like? Those all become important, both for the short and long term, but more critical for the long term. What are they going to be like, right, for the long term process? Um, One of the things I kind of point out is that sometimes, we've all dealt with Microsoft for a long time now. And I will tell you that from a support aspect, Great Plains Software was much more efficient, much better at it than Microsoft was. And keep in mind that affected how we could support everybody. So that software vendor is critical for us as well as for the end user. And the only time you really think about it is when something you need a problem fixed, right? So the idea is that response is important and hopefully infrequent, right? Which that's two parts of it, right? Um, you want to make sure that whatever product you have, whether you pick, has that ongoing implementation of new technology and functionality. Is the product set up so that they can easily incorporate new technologies and easily add functionality? Those are critical for the long term. The world is changing much faster than it did a few years ago. If you take a look from, 1993 when Dynamics was released until 2015, that market was pretty stable. But if you look at it from then to now, it's changed a lot. So we've carried Acumatica from 2015 to now, and we'll continue to. And I will tell you that the updates and functionality that they build is significant every year compared to GP, where they had a few years where they built a lot of functionality, and then they haven't really done much since 2013, to be realistic with GP. So the idea is that functionality is important. The technology becomes important as well. Are they running modern tools and modern technologies? And that doesn't sound like a big deal, but when you're running technology at 13 years old, that can be a problem. So it needs to be have a product that's easy, that they can update that technology as well as the functionality as things change. So a good example of that is we've been dealing a lot with tariffs for pure entertainment, right? We have a tariff, we don't have a tariff. Doesn't matter, right? We're not going to get, it's a thing where how does the system deal with that as you receive your materials if you're a distributor or manufacturer? Those all become important. Can they adapt to that? So that's kind of the thought process on it. It's a scenario where that becomes very important. Now, one thing I will point out is we've migrated a lot of people from Dynamics GP to our cloud product, which we end up carrying in Acumatica, right? And in the next slide, I'm going to talk a little bit why we picked what we picked, right? So here are basically the top 5 reasons why I picked Acumatica. There's many more, but there's what it is. The technology. It's running on AWS cloud. That's the most reliable cloud. It has the least downtime between, Google, Microsoft, Oracle. It just runs. It just works. We've only had one instance in 10 years of a client going down. They went down for 1 hour. Take a look, and if you want to look at some of the other products out there, search for that product and say, downtime, and you'll see a history of what really transpires with that. And you won't find that for Acumatica. You'll find it for a lot of other products. Design. Um, it's easy to use. We kind of talked about that, but it's not only the design of the use, it's the technology. It is very adaptable. Everything's modular. So if they decide they want to pick up a different database support, or they need to change because they change the internet standards, the answer is everything's modular and just connects to everything. So it's very easy for them to make adjustments for technology changes. Right now, for example, they're in the process of making a lot of changes to adapt to AI, right? And it's a loose term that everybody uses different ways. AI is not really that new of a technology, but it's being expanded broadly in what it can do. But the idea is, they've done a lot of research on what they're going to do with it. So the idea is they can very easily build that technology in, whereas, it's not just an add-on or, hey, you have to export your data all over here. It's not going to be like that. So those are minor details. Ease of integration. open APIs. Hey, we have the system, it's very specific. We developed it. It's developed for our industry, whatever it happens to be. The API design within the system and ease of integration with the system is second to none. So pretty much anywhere you can enter information, you can integrate to it. Anywhere you can see information, you can export from it. Or you can, instead of doing import export, you can do that through the APIs. Neither will allow you to do anything dangerous to damage your data. Okay. With Dynamics GP, we were limited what we could import to, unless we went directly in the SQL tables. And that was, a lot more risky than being able to use their tools so it gets error checked before the data goes in. So that's kind of the difference in how it works. It's very powerful, et cetera. And then the reliability. Over the years, Dynamics has been a very reliable product, but it's still dependent upon how reliable your server is. And you typically, and we only had a couple of environments for running clustered environments for SQL for Dynamics. So your risk was having, one server. And, fortunately, they're pretty reliable. But when they went down, many times it was a day or two of downtime because, you had to get a new hard drive or you didn't have the hot swap or the hot swap had to rebuild before you could, put everything back. So those are the kind of things that kind of happen, right? So the idea is the reliability is much higher with this. Functionality, much more in depth. We can do, things that we had to do third parties for in the past. For example, we can connect if you do FedEx or UPS shipping, we can do that. USPS, you can connect to LTL. That's just in distribution. We have built-in barcoding, right? If you're doing distribution, I mentioned before the reporting for financial report writing is built in. So the functionality is much more in depth. It can cover everything industry-wise from all the way from general ledger finance, ARAP, sales orders, distribution, but also gets into things like construction, which Dynamics GP never had. You know, Acumatica is a very powerful project module on top of that. We have things like the manufacturing modules, much more extensive. There's quality control built in. It's much more extensive than what GP had. And that's both for distribution and or manufacturing. There's also, parts for retail. So if you have a website that's running Shopify or BigCommerce, there's a pre-built integration that you can tailor for your use, meaning that you can maintain your inventory items and your pricing in Acumatica automatically feeds the website. When you take orders on the website, they automatically come in. When you fulfill them, it updates the website to know that it's been shipped, right, for the customer. You can send out notifications, right? And the beauty of it is, well, we can do email within GP if you have Outlook connected to it. We're not dependent on Outlook for that. And the nice part about it is down the road is, hey, did that email go out? Well, with Acumatica, what happens is it gets attached to the transaction you sent out. So if you send out ACH notifications or payments, electronic payments, it will end up showing that notification was sent out. It attaches it. So not only do I know it went out because it went out through my Outlook, right? It actually is in the system, so everybody can see it if they have rights to that particular area. Adaptability. I mentioned low code, no code. Again, very adaptable to how you want to use the system. Okay. Dashboards, can't stress enough how functional they are, how much it streamlines people's jobs, how easy it is to use that way. Vendor support. For us, this is critical. With Acumatica, you can get a 1 hour guaranteed response. All right. The default is 2 hours, right? And that comes with the product. But the idea is that response time is important. And it's one of those kind of things where that's refreshing because back in the GP days, we had that. And then with Microsoft, it got less and less. To the point now, just so you know, if we put a support call into Microsoft for GP, it takes roughly a couple of days for it to get in their system and another day or two for them to reply. And then they got to assign a person. It takes almost 5 to 7 business days before we get our first real response. Doesn't sound like a big deal until, hey, I got to get payroll out the door. I don't care, right? So we end up coming up with various workarounds. We've done different things with it. But the answer is sometimes that vendor support is crucial, right? It's not just us. It's important that we respond, and we do. But the idea is sometimes we need the vendor to actually do it very well. And that's critical for all of us. So it's something to kind of review. And then last but not least, the value, right? How much does it cost compared to other products? How much does it value add for what it can do for you? And what you'll find is that if you compare apples to apples for functionality and performance, you'll typically find if you take into account all your hardware expenditures, you'll find that Acumatica is a very reasonable value for what it provides. And that becomes important. It's kind of a long-term scenario. So the idea is it's not the value just today, but what's the value of the next 13 years or 20 years? Okay. And those sound like minor details, but it's important of who you're working with. And, like, with Acumatica, we can get you in touch with anybody from the, CEO on down. Okay. Try that with, a lot of other systems. Right. So those are important factors. Okay. So, the other part is they have 15,000 installations or so, give or take. So the idea is, they're out there. For information's sake, when GP peaked, when it had its most installations, they had about 43,000 installations, just to put that in perspective. Okay. So I know if you're in GP world, it seems like everybody was running it, but not everybody in the world ran GP. But it was the most successful out of the group, even still. Okay. Questions? And I have my contact information up here if anybody wants to see it. Anybody have any questions?
Hi, yes, there's actually a question from earlier that says, what can we expect as far as how our time would be allocated for the transition?
Okay. So, yeah, I mentioned that it might take 200 to 1,500 hours. And of course, that depends upon obviously what you're implementing. And nobody has time to do it full time, right? Because you have your day-to-day job still. You have to keep the existing invoices going out, bills being paid, financial statements out, etc. So what we try to do is limit it to on an average of about 10 hours a week for various individuals. That doesn't mean that there's times where we have 20 hours in one week for of work that's required. But there's other weeks where we might, okay, you don't have to do anything this week. So the idea is we try to keep that implementation time frame so that it's reasonable. So we're not trying to really um, add on too many more than 10 hours a week on average. But there could be a few peaks and valleys to it. So that's kind of the goal. So, some people that are key, for example, we recommend you do an internal project manager of some sort and a sponsor. You end up with those. Sometimes they might need 20 hours a week to kind of keep everything moving properly. Because not only, we can control our team, but somebody on the other side needs to do their side to make sure things are getting accomplished. All right. So invariably, so if you extrapolate that, if you have a smaller install and you have 20 hours, 10 hours a week, you're looking at 20 weeks. All right. Which is a little less than half a year, kind of what I was kind of implying in there. All right. Um, Keep in mind when you're doing implementation, you don't want it to fall on one person either, meaning that, hey, if we have somebody that does with inventory all the time, we need to bring them in fairly early on so that they are working and helping implement the inventory module, getting inventory items set up, structured, etc. Okay. Shelby, any other questions?
Just one other one, asking to kind of elaborate on the risks of waiting to transition.
Oh, good question. I should have probably included that, right? Here's the risk, right? Over time, I got to turn this thing off. This is driving me crazy. Sorry about that. There, we took care of that. Sorry about that. So, when we end up dealing with, sorry, I lost the question. My fault.
Uh,
Shiny bells.
no, that's okay. It was just asking to elaborate on the risks of waiting.
Oh, the risk of waiting. So here's the risk, right? Right now, Microsoft Dynamics is, um, not really being updated that much, right? They're not coming out with many updates throughout the year. So, for example, one of the risks are, maybe they come out with a Windows 11 update that affects us, but they're not coming out with the next update until October. So the risk is, okay, you can't update for a security update because Dynamics isn't prepared for it, right? That's one risk. The second is you're kind of losing out in the sense that, um, as time goes on, the servers are getting older and things like that. And a lot of people are running servers that aren't brand new. And that's probably the vast majority of GP implementations at this point. So one of the risks is, do you end up with a hardware failure? And so with that, then you end up having to rebuild. And if you're not on a current version, that's different than if you're on an older version, right? So we have to come up with a code for, Dynamics GP 2015, for example, right? Those things, we have them all, believe it or not. We actually have it all the way back to version 1.3. So God forbid we come up with somebody that's running 1.3 at this point. But the idea is we still have it. So the idea is you might end up having that risk of a hardware recovery. And that's not what we want to have. We want to make sure that you're taking care of this before that. The last part is that as you go on, there's a risk that maybe they make a change to look, 365 or Outlook, and the next thing you know, you can't send out your emails for EFTs and things like that. There's all those kind of things that kind of happen. So you could end up with a system where, you'd like to think Microsoft is all coordinated between their different divisions, but they're not as coordinated as you think. They've kind of run more like separate companies. So, we could have a security update or an update to Windows 11 where all of a sudden we're having difficulties with Dynamics GP. And we've had a few instances of that with different things and a few client sites where we had to pause updates. So that's kind of the risk of it. And then the last part is that, keep in mind, if you have competitors, they're probably moving too, right? So, we are having, acceptable level of technology and efficiency from 5, 10, 15 years ago, they're probably moving forward. And if they are, you're going to be left behind and you're going to have a much more difficult time competing. So those are kind of the big factors. And then, you can talk about efficiency and all that kind of stuff again, but that's another topic. But the idea is longer term, that's kind of the risk to it. You could end up with a system down for a few days or as you replace things, and it takes time. And that's not what we want for the system. So, okay. Shelby, any other questions?
No, that looks like it was
No.
it.
Okay, so I hope everybody has a great day. I hope I didn't take too much of your time. I tried to keep it really simple and short. If you have any questions, definitely feel free to reach out to me. That's my email address, my phone number, be glad to help you answer any questions you have specifically. Thank you very much for attending today.